Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start off with our anchor song. It's 10:15. I know I can. So something like this. Let's see. Yep, we got some pictures there. All right, nice and slow. Here we go.
My name is Heather Norby. I use the pronouns she and hers. I am the spiritual life director for this congregation, and I am also a seminary student at Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, my hometown. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful October morning. To those of you here in person, and to those of you on Zoom or social media, we are glad to have you, however you have arrived. Please know that you belong here. Whatever your gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, abilities, or theological beliefs, Unitarian Universalism is a loving and affirming faith in which we learn, grow, and co-create the sacred as a community. If you are new here, please know that we would love to get to know you better, so please join us after the service in the social hall or say hello in an online chat feature. Our e-newsletter is published every Wednesday, and it is the main source of information for what goes on around here. So be sure to sign up and read all about this happening community. Printed copies are available, and there's one posted on our hallway bulletin board. I just want to lift up a few items from the newsletter that serve our mission of love plus connection equals transformation. This Wednesday night, we do have a Wednesday night program, but it's what we call small group, and those are closed. I don't know how that, so you sign up for a small group, and then once we have the group, we continue with that group for a few months to deepen the experience, and then we start over again. So this Wednesday night, if you haven't signed up, please know that the group is closed, but if you want to sign up for a small group, please email me, and I will see about starting something else. Or ask me if you have any questions, if that doesn't make sense. Okay, also, this next Saturday, October 30th, is the Raven. Okay, so we've been holding the Raven for several years, and even before that, we had some sort of Halloween fundraiser. But this year, we are raising money for the Rose Dynasty Foundation, and for ourselves, we're going to split the profits with Mama Ashley Rose. And tickets can be bought online at the Rose Dynasty website, or Dorothy has a sign-up sheet, and she'll have this after the service. So if you need tickets, please see Dorothy and work that out. Yes? Okay, here. I'll let you have that so we don't forget. Okay. Next week's worship service, we are doing our All Souls and Ancestors ritual. So we ask you to bring in a picture or an artifact, a memento from an ancestor of yours that inspires you to be courageous. And we will share how that ancestor inspired us to be courageous. We will also, because it's the day before Halloween, say if you want to dress up and have a little fun, we can do that too. You can wear a costume. I won't stop you. maybe it's something that reminds you of your ancestor. And also, bring a pumpkin, because we'll carve them together after the service. Yay. Well, today, I have the pleasure of co-creating this worship service with Sarah Mix. Yes, thank you. So often, in an examination of courage being our theme for the month, we find that we are strengthened by one another, and certainly my courage and my voice has been strengthened since Sarah joined this community. So today is a coming together of our voices and perspectives, a blending of how we are each called to speak up. And certainly, I have been curious as to how habits inspire Sarah to be courageous. So we'll hear more about that in a bit. So let us center ourselves in courage. Get comfortable in your seat. Close your eyes if you'd like, and take in some deep breaths with me. Remember that fear disconnects us from ourselves and from each other. Fear does not lead to love and justice for all, for it is fear that keeps us silent. Think of a time when you were silent, when what you really needed to do was speak up. What were you afraid of? Audre Lorde says, "We can sit in our corners mute forever while our lives are wasted, while our children are distorted and destroyed, while our earth is poisoned. We can sit in our safe corners as mute as bottles, and still we will be no less afraid." Think of a time when you did speak up. Where did you find the courage to overcome your fear? What was it that inspired courage in you? Courage is found in unlikely places, wrote J.R.R. Tolkien. So center yourself in that courage from whatever unlikely place it was found. Remember the ways it connected you to who you truly are, how it connected you to others, how it released you from fear and gave you hope, and how it traveled with you down your path to spiritual wholeness. Breathing in and breathing out. Feel that courage in your body. Identify it so you can continue to nurture it and grow it so that in the face of injustice, you can use it to do good. Sarah will read our opening words written by the Reverend Dr. David Breeden.
We gather together here, now, summoning our courage to be. We gather, bringing our weariness and our energy. We gather bringing our wariness and our visions. Like trees in rocky places, our roots clutch. What we find is each other. What we find is each other holding tightly. Courage is not certitude. Courage is not assurance. Courage is the willingness to join in the attempt, to join in the unlikely, even impossible. Courage is a choice. Courage is a way of knowing. Courage is a way of joining together. Courage is knowing that together we will do what none of us can do alone.
On Sunday mornings, UU churches around the world light a chalice, knowing that together we can do more. Let us light our chalice to inspire courage in each one of us today, knowing that we are in this together. Our chalice lighter today is Isabella Steele. She will come forward as we sing and sign our hymn number 123, Spirit of Life. For helping us. We have a story for all ages today, all ages. And so I invite our children, our youth, our young at heart to come forward and listen to this story. This was by Matt Meyer. Matt Meyer, if you remember, if you were here last year, did a service with us on Zoom. He is a Unitarian Universalist musician. And he wrote this story called Desmond Gets Free. And so we're actually we have the book, but we're going to watch the video in which Matt Meyer tells the story himself.
Cine Books presents Desmond Gets Free by Matt Meyer, illustrated by Kim Pham. For all those working to build a new world of justice, equity, and compassion. Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond woke with the sunrise and would spend the day playing in the meadow. And every evening, Desmond would go to sleep in the middle of that meadow, under the beautiful starry sky. One night, though, Desmond awoke when it was still dark out. He tried to roll over to a more comfortable spot, but something wasn't right. Desmond realized that his tail was stuck right to the ground and beginning to throb with pain. He felt behind him, and there was a huge boulder that seemed to have fallen in the middle of the meadow just on his tail. Desmond pushed on the boulder and tugged on his tail. He pushed on the boulder and tugged on his tail, and he pushed and tugged and pushed and tugged, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up, he saw a giraffe nearby in the grass. Good news, he thought. "Oh, giraffe," Desmond cried, "could you please push the boulder a few inches in the other direction so I could go free?" The giraffe looked at Desmond and laughed the way giraffes do. "Silly mouse," said the giraffe. "That's no boulder. That's an elephant that's fallen asleep in the middle of the meadow just on your tail." "Well, if you could just wake the elephant and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." "Well," replied the giraffe, "you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this." Desmond quietly replied, "Well, I do not appreciate your neutrality." The giraffe wandered off, and Desmond tried calling out to the elephant to wake him up.
Hey, hey.
But those giant ears were just too far away on the other side of that giant elephant body. So again, Desmond pushed on the elephant and tugged on his tail. He pushed and tugged and pushed and he tugged, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up again, a gazelle wandered by. "Oh, gazelle," he cried, "oh, gazelle,
Hey.
it seems that an elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of this meadow. I'm stuck, and it hurts. I wonder if you could gently wake him and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, so I might go free." "Well," said the gazelle, "I see your problem there, but you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like these." Desmond replied almost to himself this time, "I do not appreciate your neutrality." Desmond tried again to call out to the elephant.
Hey,
He
hey.
tried again to push the giant animal away. He tried again and again to tug his little tail free, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up for the last time, he saw another mouse wandering through the meadow.
Hey.
"My name is Nelson. Nelson, this giant elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you might run over and call out into his giant ears and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction so I could go free," Desmond asked. "Of course," said Nelson. Nelson ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body. And he called up to those giant elephant ears at the top of that giant elephant head.
Hey.
But the elephant didn't budge. The elephant heard Nelson's small voice far away, but he felt too comfortable to move. Nelson ran back to Desmond, a little out of breath, and said, "I have an idea. Don't move." He ran off. "I won't," muttered Desmond. A little while later, though, Nelson emerged through the tall grass, and he wasn't alone. Nelson had found 3 other mouse friends to help him, and each one of them had also brought another 3 friends. The whole group of them ran over to the giant head of that giant elephant. One mouse scrambled up onto the shoulders of another, and another mouse scrambled up on her shoulders, and then one after another they climbed up until the whole group of them had formed a long mouse ladder right up the side of that elephant. At last, Nelson climbed up the shoulders of his mouse friends, one on top of the other, until he was way up on that giant elephant head, standing next to that giant elephant ear.
Hey!
"Excuse me," he called out right into that ear. "It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. I wonder if you could just roll over a few inches in the other direction so he might go free." The giant elephant made a giant, low groan. "I'm comfortable just where I am. Go away." So Nelson asked more of his mouse friends to climb up. One by one, they helped each other up the side of the elephant. One by one, they called out into that giant elephant ear on top of that giant elephant head.
Hey! Hey!
Again, the giant elephant made a giant low groan. "I'm comfortable just where I am. Go away." Then Nelson had an idea. He whispered to the mice. And then, all at once, they yelled out together, "Excuse us! It seems you've fallen asleep on our friend's tail in the middle of this meadow. Roll over a few inches in the other direction so he can go free." This time, all those voices together, right next to the elephant's ear, were too loud to ignore. "I was comfortable where I was, but I'll move over if you just agree to stop making such a racket," the elephant cried out. And then the elephant rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and the other mice helped each other climb back down, and Desmond was finally free. Desmond and Nelson and all their mouse friends spent the rest of that beautiful day playing in the middle of that beautiful meadow. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality."
So I'm going to let y'all take this book to RE. We can talk about who was courageous in this story. The giraffe? Was the giraffe courageous? No. The gazelle? No. The mice? Yes. All right, take this, Miss Melissa. Thank you so much. The weaving of joys and sorrows that flow throughout all of our lives. Let us recognize the complexities of the world and of our very human way of belonging to it all. Take a moment to reflect on all that has happened in your life this week. What were the joys? what were your sorrows? We engage in this ritual every week as a way to face the world together and as a way to heal, knowing that we are not alone. Before I invite you up to put stones in the water for your joys and sorrows, I would just like to lift up that our friend Colette is moving to Delray Beach this week. So just as we've gotten to know her, she's off on a new adventure, so please wish her well in Delray. So you may come up now to put a pebble, if you come around this way, and drop a pebble in the water for your joys and sorrows, and then go back to your seat. Our choir will continue to sing with us. Thank you. Petra, could you please put a stone in for our friends on Zoom? Daniel Wagner, my mom, Maggie McClelland, and Marilyn Crossan. We're so glad you could join us on Zoom today.
I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood, that the speaking profits me beyond any other effect. What I most regretted were my silences. Of what had I ever been afraid? To question or to speak as I believed could have meant pain or death. But we all hurt in so many different ways, all the time, and pain will either change or end. Your silence will not protect you. And of course I am afraid, because the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that always seems fraught with danger. Audre Lorde.
Transforming silence into language has been a lifelong challenge for me. It is especially so when standing in front of someone speaking words that contradict my own understanding of the world. words that cut down and harm others. I struggled with a painful sort of shyness my entire childhood and adolescence, and avoiding confrontation and conflict was definitely my preferred path forward, much like the giraffe. And it was not a courageous path. Yet, I do have a compassionate heart that seeks justice and equity for all, as our second UU principle promotes. So transforming silence into words became, and is still becoming, a necessary part of my life as I strive to live out my values and turn our Unitarian Universalist principles into action. Transforming silence into language takes courage for any of us, painfully shy or not. And furthermore, the language we choose to use in the face of injustice matters if it is to be effective. I remember a time some years ago, perhaps around 2007 or 2008, I was a young mother and a new Unitarian Universalist. I worked a little part-time job at Books A Million. It was an easy job. The customers weren't usually difficult, and I enjoyed getting out of the house and being around all those books. But one encounter with a customer stands out in my mind as a moment which changed me and taught me that I could courageously use my words. I was checking out an older gentleman who was buying books, and as he was writing his check, he started to sarcastically complain about Barack Hussein Obama, and then continued down the path of Islamophobia, making untruthful and hateful statements about Muslim people. I guess he thought he was safe standing there in front of me, another white person, using harmful racist language. I remember the feeling of anger swelling up in my body, boiling my blood, and making my stomach churn. Was I really going to let this man get away with this kind of behavior? Was I going to stay silent, enabling hate to continue to work in the world? If I spoke up, would this man inflict harm upon me? I was at work and knew I had to remain somewhat composed, as I did value my job, but ultimately I value people more. And as some of you may know, my sister lives in the Middle East, is married to a Muslim man, and raises her 6 children in the tradition of Islam. So no matter how painfully shy and fearful of confrontation I was, the actual distress I was experiencing in my body in that moment, as my sister and her family were being insulted, and as any Muslim person was potentially being in the path of harm, I could not remain silent. Sir, I began, my voice a little shaky, yet with some sort of sustaining and courageous power lifting it up from inside of me. I said, what you say is not true. To be honest, I don't remember what else I said. Something to the extent of my sister and this, that, and the other. But I know what I didn't do was spew hatred and anger back at him. I simply spoke up and stated what I knew to be true. And that man became very quiet and very red in the face with embarrassment as far as I could tell. He mumbled some sort of an apology, grabbed his stuff, and walked out the door, head down. I had to breathe very deeply after that encounter, and it took me a while to stop shaking. As Audre Lorde stated in the quote that Sarah read, I experienced a self-revelation in that moment of transforming silence into language. I found that I could indeed speak with courage in a way that not only shut down hatred in that moment, but hopefully became a moment in which the man in front of me had to think about his own thoughts and actions. I did not attack him back, I just merely spoke the truth. I don't know how this man continued to live his life, of course, but I know that silence would have enabled his hate to gain more power. It was one small moment in time, and as in our story earlier, I was only like one little mouse trying to speak into the giant elephant's ear. I know I made that one man uncomfortable enough to think, but the elephant of Islamophobia and racism in general still causes pain in this world. How much courage will it take to make it stop? It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will.
Injustice is a broad term to conceptualize. A big concept with so many facets and nuances, it seems hard to get a good consensus.
Right. So in the story I just told, I was talking about speaking up to only one person. Did that one person embody injustice? Given that this happened only a few years after 9/11, I suppose this man thought hating Muslims was some form of justice for the American people. I know that finding the courage to speak up and to speak some truth was a much better option than remaining silent, but how much did it really matter that I said something in that moment to just one person?
Speaking up in those small moments helps shape a kinder countenance in our culture, piece by piece, person by person. I am emboldened by humans being called to speak their truth. I feel as though they've tapped into a primal power in pursuit of our greatest good. The power of their story and the power of the stories they inspire are the great legacy of connection.
Right. Just like the life and courage of Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela inspired Matt Meyer to write the story we read earlier.
Stories can teach us empathy. They can convey complex meanings across populations. If we're mindful about how we interpret the stories in our lives and the cross-section of humans we derive them from, it can be life-changing, culture-shaping work. Being open to empathizing with varied lived experiences gives us the power to more accurately understand injustice and safeguard against it.
And so, if I'm to approach what happened in my story from a place of empathy, which is really hard to do in those moments, I might understand the injustice in this case as systemic. In other words, the man I spoke up to had been fed a lie by the media and other powers that be that there is some great force of evil that we must fight against at all cost. That's an unfortunate story that we encounter in our culture. he was led to believe that that force of evil was Islam and Muslim people. He probably didn't see himself as being discriminatory and oppressive, but as someone willing to conquer the force of evil for his country. The people in power who want to stay in power have an easier time doing that when they set us up in a system that upholds an unnuanced dichotomy of good and evil, in which we must believe that all the others are going to cause us harm and take away our freedom. I wonder if that man, as he stood in front of me, thought I would perceive him as some sort of patriot, some sort of brave individual speaking up against the forces that are endangering us. I feel good about not yelling obscenities and hurtful names at this man, as just speaking the truth as I know it to be, that Muslim people have as much inherent worth and dignity as anyone, that they are not the enemy, indeed they are my family, and that I know them as loving, peace-seeking people, simply stating that truth while holding the man in front of me with as much inherent worth and dignity as possible. Well, that approach seems to have been effective, and perhaps more effective than fighting fire with fire or doing the same thing we always do, producing the same result of disconnection and divisiveness.
I think that's why I was attracted to interpreting this from the perspective of a hobbit.
Hobbits, Sarah? Why hobbits? Tell me more about this.
Hobbits have such a special place in my heart because of their courage and fortitude and kind nature. And they have the lovely benefit of being fictional. Created by Tolkien and first published in 1937, Hobbits spend the book series they shape being uniquely positioned to oppose malicious forces. Admittedly a bit smaller than the rest of the Fellowship, they commit to an uncertain and potentially deadly task. Honestly, they just show up in the smallest, most beautiful ways consistently. It's never a large declaration of fortitude. It's the little behaviors in congress with their community that make the biggest difference. Tolkien's work was shaped by personal experiences during World War I and his interests in history, religion, and language. I think the combination made him an especially effective storyteller. Stories help us interpret the interdependent web of life. They foster connection and sharpen dissent. Creating a sustaining narrative is an underanalyzed aspect of how we develop our individual identities, our legacies, and our culture at large.
Okay, Sarah, I think I get what you're saying. Stories can present to us ways of solving problems. Stories and the complexities of the characters within them can inspire us to live by our values. Stories can help give us the courage to speak up to injustice. Essentially, it matters what stories we tell and what stories we believe, for stories help to shape the world. A writer like Tolkien wasn't just creating fantasy for fantasy's sake. He had a story to tell based on real-world experiences, and he put it into fantasy to draw us in and inspire us. I bet all of you have a story that draws you in and inspires you with the courage to put your values into action. Take a moment to think of the stories that give your life meaning. Maybe it's Star Wars or Hansel and Gretel. Maybe it's a true story of a real-world person like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. Take a moment to bring that story up in your mind and your heart.
For his part, Tolkien had the advantage of coaxing from the invented races of dwarves, elves, orcs, and Maiar, a diverse expression of skill and emotion, aptly united against their common foe. But the complexities of our lives don't lend to convenient narratives. So often, questioning power structures doesn't come with the ringing endorsement of your peers. Again and again, in the stories of brave iconoclasts and activists across cultures, we find intense scrutiny, violence, and death.
Indeed. When I reflect back on finding my courage and using my voice to quell the Islamophobia in that man at Books A Million that day, I remember that as a new Unitarian Universalist, I was especially inspired by the stories I was hearing about the words and deeds of prophetic women and men which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Unitarian Universalists have 6 sources of wisdom and inspiration, and that, the prophetic people, is our second source. So I want to share with you one of the stories I first heard when I started to come here to this church. A true story that sat with me and was a part of my call to courage in that moment that I spoke up. This story, if you want to read more about it, can be found on beaconbroadside.com. I'll read you a little bit. On March 7th, 1965, activists set out to march from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery. The marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where they were met by a blockade of state troopers and local lawmakers. After refusing to disperse, the marchers were attacked with clubs and tear gas. The event came to be known as Bloody Sunday. James Reeb was among 40 Unitarian Universalist ministers who answered a call from Martin Luther King Jr. for religious leaders to join him in Selma after the violent confrontation. On March 9th, Reverend James Reeb and 400 other religious leaders joined 2,000 African Americans to march over the bridge again to the site of the attack, where they kneeled and prayed before returning to Selma. The march had been cut short because of an order prohibiting it until protection could be provided to the marchers. That night, Reverend Reeb and 2 other UU ministers were attacked outside a whites-only restaurant. Reverend Reeb died 2 days later from his injuries. On March 21st, a federally sanctioned march from Selma to Montgomery began. The march was limited to 300 people, but swelled to 2,500 by the last day. On August 6th, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote the eulogy for the Reverend James Reeb, and it was delivered on March 15th, 1965. Just want to read you a couple excerpts from that. King wrote, "The world is aroused over the murder of James Reeb, for he symbolizes the forces of goodwill in our nation. He demonstrated the conscience of the nation. He was a witness to the truth that men of different races and classes might live, eat, and work together as brothers. Naturally, we are compelled to ask the question, who killed James Reeb? The answer is simple and rather limited when we think of the who. He was murdered by a few sick, demented, and misguided men who have the strange notion that you express dissent through murder. There is another haunting, poignant, desperate question we are forced to ask this afternoon. It is the question, what killed James Reeb? When we move from the who to the what, the blame is wide and the responsibility grows. He goes on to say, James Reeb was murdered by the indifference of every minister of the gospel who has remained silent behind the safe security of stained glass windows. He was murdered by the irrelevancy of a church that will stand amid social evil and serve as a tail light rather than a headlight, an echo rather than a voice. He was murdered by the irresponsibility of every politician who has moved down the path of demagoguery, who has fed his constituents the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism. He was murdered by the brutality of every sheriff and law enforcement agent who practices lawlessness in the name of the law. He was murdered by the timidity of a federal government that can spend millions of dollars a day to keep troops in South Vietnam, yet cannot protect the lives of its own citizens seeking constitutional rights. And King concludes, so in his death, James Reeb says something to each of us, black and white alike, says that we must substitute courage for caution, says to us that we must be concerned not merely about who murdered him, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murder. His death says to us that we must work passionately, unrelentingly, to make the American dream a reality. So he did not die in vain. To find the courage to work passionately against injustice. It will be hard. We will do it together. And the road will be muddy and rough.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will. And we will get there, heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will. And we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will.
I think the courage to speak out against injustice is something most people seek to exemplify in their own way. A part of us hopes we'd oppose harmful forces in our lives and protect the ones we love. We tend to identify with presented protagonists, and that attraction to doing good shows up over and over again in the stories we tell ourselves and others. Stories like The Lord of the Rings make conceptualizing an evil to rally against very clear. The existence of every race on Middle-earth is being threatened by an ancient, malevolent force. Obviously, this is a call to action for our heroes. Great harm to all living things is certainly something worth opposing. But in circumstances like apartheid, Jim Crow, and the Chinese Exclusion Act, the oppressive system causing great harm was legally upheld. That's what makes Escape into a Story so enthralling. The emotional payoff for participating in epic fantasy is huge. Who doesn't want to defeat evil, slay a dragon, or protect the light of truth? For most of our collective history, stories have allowed us the space to explore our humanity, what it means to be good, and by extension, bad. The harm stemming from injustice we see enacted in real life never seems to present that clearly, though. In fact, I more often see that how we interpret the exact set of circumstances can differ wildly based on perspective, and things like consensus, if you ever reach one, shift over days, and years, and centuries. We need the moral courage to constantly question our thoughts and how we use those to shape our actions. Cornel West says, we need the courage to question the powers that be, the courage to be impatient with evil and patient with people, the courage to fight for social justice. In many instances, we will be stepping out on nothing and just hoping to land on something. But that's the struggle. To live it is to wrestle with despair, yet never allow despair to have the last word. Cultivating feelings of loving kindness with those we meet shapes how inclusive our values become, and facilitates a kinship with all. The beautiful thing about the courage to speak up is that the more we speak out, the more we broaden our individual and community horizons, the closer we come to eradicating the need entirely. We can work toward a forward-thinking, egalitarian-based culture by modeling those behaviors with ourselves and our communities. In the very wise words of our friend Desmond, if you want peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. And because I think it's a helpful qualifier, don't raise your voice, improve your argument.
Sarah, I heard you mention cultivating feelings of loving kindness with those we meet and encouraging us to talk to our enemies. That is hard. When Desmond Tutu charges us with improving our argument, do you think that means holding some kind of loving kindness towards the people we are arguing with? That is hard. Do people spewing hatred because they think they are fighting off evil? How are we not to be fearful, knowing that people who have spoken up have met violence and death? I find an answer to this again in Martin Luther King Jr.'s words found in the eulogy to Reverend James Reeb. He wrote, "So in spite of the darkness of this hour, we must not despair. We must not become bitter, nor must we harbor the desire to retaliate with violence. We must not lose faith in our white brothers who happen to be misguided. Somehow, we must still believe that the most misguided among them will learn to respect the dignity and worth of all human personalities." That is hard work. The courage to be like that in the world is hard to find. It is especially difficult to find when injustice manifests itself in so many complex ways, when it seems too large to overcome. Hopelessness and fear keep us silent, but as Audre Lorde reminds us, your silence will not protect you. Speaking up is hard, but silence protects no one. So look for courage in unexpected places. Find courage in the stories we tell and use that to inspire you in those moments when your voice of reason and truth is needed. When all of us, like all the mice together that freed Desmond, or like all the people of Tolkien's Middle-earth, or like all the people that marched in Selma, when all of us speak, we can move the elephant. We can defeat the real forces of injustice that seek to keep us disconnected and powerless. When we all speak up together, we honor those that came before us with courage, and we can write the story of our future, one that speaks of compassion, equity, and justice for everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for joining with me today. Thank you. We have now come upon the moment when we can share our treasures with this community as an act of faith. When we each give what we can back to life, we serve a greater good, helping to create a world in which everyone knows they belong. Adam will play the piano for us while the ushers pass the plates. My closing words are once again from Martin Luther King Jr. One day, the history of this great period of social change will be written in all of its completeness. On that bright day, our nation will recognize its real heroes. They will be thousands of dedicated men and women with a noble sense of purpose. My hope is that we are a part of those thousands of dedicated people who change the world and write the story of our future. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to extinguish our chalice. Petra, my elf friend, would you please extinguish the chalice? Please say the words with me. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world. Well, I noticed how much y'all liked Woyaya, and so we're all going to participate now. We're going to sing the song, and when we reach the Woyayas at the end, we will march ourselves together into the social hall. March, dance, sing, have fun, grab a shaker. Do it together. Stir up.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get